One of the things that I think you've mentioned before is with Gloria Steinem being funded by the CIA or, being part of a CIA project to, I suppose, decontextualize, as you've talked about, feminism when it's a very real issue. We definitely need feminism, but now it's been sort of destroyed in many aspects and used as a pretext for intervention.
If you look at the evolution of American feminism, it was always funded and promoted by wealthy women. So the suffragettes who achieved female suffrage in 1920 for American women were generally very, very wealthy women. And there were one or two really wealthy women who sponsored the legislation and lobbied. And so it always had a class basis. But its class formation in the 1970s became all the more stark because second wave feminism was a professional managerial class feminism. And throughout the 30s and 40s, there were socialist feminists who were marginalized during the McCarthy era, during the anti-communist era. And these were women who were really focused on work issues, leave issues, maternity care, childcare issues. But you see in the 70s, and it was totally directed by upper middle class, professional class women, there's a complete focus on a kind of libertarian attitude towards sexuality, sexual freedom, and then abortion rights becomes their singular focus. Singular. It's also part of this NGOization of the social movements that happened in the 70s. It's really chilling to look at how a lot of these movements that grew out of the social movements became just like fundraising organizations and lobbyists. And I
Yeah.
think you call them charities in the UK.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear the origin of feminism because I think from an American perspective, just because personally I was introduced to it by my parents, it was the whole thing about women hold up half of the sky, the communist. I have not researched whether or not there was any other, but to me it comes across as like something quite different from.
Well, Mao and the Chinese Communist Party really did want to break the back of the Confucian family in China. And since Deng Xiaoping's reforms, people have walked that back, and so there's a lot of reconfucianization. But one of the things that about modernity and modernization from the Republican Revolution onward in 1911 was modernizing China. And modernizing China meant changing the position of women in Chinese society. So chattel slavery, arranged marriages were outlawed by the first Republican government. And then with the communists, you had this idea that outside of the Confucian hierarchy, we want to endow women and men with the right to marry people they love. That was like considered, that was revolutionary after 1949. And also because of the lack of a cadre of educated people, we needed to educate women to fill positions of teaching in the party, everything else. And Mao came up with that slogan, women hold up half the sky. And one of the things that can be construed now as like cruelty and child abuse was that in the communes, in the collectives, there were 24-hour nurseries. Like you could send your kid to a nursery school because you were building the revolution. And it was about breaking this kind of like Chinese family clan idea. We've gone back to it. The clan had to be substituted for the party. And that was also about trying to break this kind of pre-modern mobster. It was also very mobster-like. Like I have to accrue all the power to my clan. I have a completely different relationship to my clan. When I look at the people from the other clan, they're competitors. I kill them. At the highest level, it becomes warlordism and gangsterism. So the communists were trying to create a civic society, secularizing the Chinese family, and a lot of that had to do with changing the way that women were seen. It was the same thing in the Soviet Union, but once communism collapsed, women became sex workers again. The whole transactional thing about young women and the trans mercantile capitalism just brought back all of these economic disparities. And one of the things that the communists were really proud of was actually destroying the networks of prostitution in Shanghai, which was one of the biggest, sort of sex work, drug networks in Asia. And all of that has kind of come back. The CCP doesn't want it to come back. It's just very hard to control.